He wasn't doing anything wrong, just standing outside, waiting for a ride. But to one officer, his skin color was enough to label him a problem. In a split second, what should have been an ordinary moment turned into a scene of humiliation no one should ever endure. What the officer didn't know was that the man he disrespected wasn't just anybody, and the truth about who he really was would soon flip the balance of power in the most shocking way. So how did a simple act of arrogance expose something much bigger? Hit subscribe and join our community asterisk. It was supposed to be just another day. James, a hard-working professional in his mid-40s, had built a reputation for being calm, fair, and deeply respected by those who truly knew him. On most mornings, he started his day with quiet routines, coffee in hand, a quick call to his mother to check in, and a silent prayer before heading out. To anyone passing by, he looked like any other man going about his business. But beneath the surface, James carried a lifetime of lessons about patience, dignity, and what it meant to be judged before being known. That afternoon, he had no intention of drawing attention to himself. He was dressed neatly, standing near the station as he waited for his driver to arrive. People came and went around him, barely noticing, but one pair of eyes did. A uniformed officer pulled up, scanning the area, his gaze locking onto James with an instant, unearned suspicion. James didn't flinch. He was used to the silent stares, the quick judgments, the kind of prejudice that seemed woven into daily life. Still, in that moment, he couldn't imagine that this ordinary wait would spiral into something that would not only test his patience, but also reveal a shocking truth the officer could never have prepared for. The officer stepped out of his car with a swagger that spoke louder than words. His badge caught the afternoon sun, flashing like a warning sign. He didn't ask James for identification, didn't begin with a simple question. He began with suspicion. A sharp, cutting tone filled the air. "What are you doing here?" James stayed calm, his voice steady. "I'm waiting for a ride." But the officer's eyes narrowed as if those words were a cover for something more sinister. To him, James didn't look like a man waiting. He looked like a problem to be dealt with. A few passers-by slowed their pace, sensing the tension, but choosing silence. James could feel their eyes on him, but none of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than any word, an unspoken agreement that they would not interfere. The officer stepped closer, the distance between them closing in, his voice dripping with arrogance. "People like you, always hanging around where you don't belong." The words cut deep, but James swallowed his pride. He had been through this before. Still, the sting of humiliation never dulled. The officer's hand hovered near his belt, not drawing his weapon, but making sure James saw the gesture. It wasn't protection. It was intimidation. Then, the moment that would burn itself into James's memory. The officer spat at his feet. The sound, the sight, the pure disrespect. It was more than an insult. It was a declaration. In that instant, James felt the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders, the same contempt that had marked his community for centuries. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers passing between them, but no one stepped forward. James's jaw tightened. Every instinct told him to walk away, to avoid the escalation, but another voice inside him said, "This time is different. This won't end like the others." The officer smirked, confident in his power, certain that nothing James did could change the narrative. He leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it personal. "Men like you should remember their place." But what the officer didn't know was that this moment, this reckless display of hate, was setting the stage for a reversal he could never have imagined. Because James wasn't just a man waiting for a ride. He was someone whose authority, once revealed, would strip the arrogance from this encounter and expose a truth that no uniform could protect against. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to break. And when it did, the fallout would be unforgettable. Asterisk. The officer's smirk widened as he stepped even closer, his shadow falling over James. The crowd grew thicker now, some holding up their phones, others whispering nervously. But the officer didn't care. He had the badge, the uniform, the authority. Or so he thought. James stood still, refusing to shrink, though every muscle in his body burned with the weight of humiliation. The spit at his feet glistened in the sunlight, a symbol of everything he had endured his entire life. He could feel the crowd watching, waiting to see how he would react. The officer leaned in, his voice dripping with contempt. I could have you in cuffs in seconds. No one would question it. Men like you never get the benefit of the doubt. He reached for his radio, preparing to escalate things further, to turn a fabricated suspicion into something far more dangerous. For a moment, time slowed. James thought of his family, his years of service, the countless sacrifices he had made to be where he was today. He thought of every young black man who had faced moments like this without the power to push back. His chest tightened, but he didn't move. Not yet. Then, another voice cut through the air, calm, firm, unshakable. Officer, stand down! The crowd shifted, confusion rippling through them. The officer turned, annoyed at the interruption, until he realized who was speaking. The murmurs grew louder, phones tilted higher, and the whispers became a collective gasp. Because the man he had just spat on, the one he had humiliated in front of strangers, wasn't just another passerby. He was the newly appointed chief of police. The officer's face drained of color, his authority crumbling in an instant. The badge on his chest suddenly felt smaller, weaker, almost meaningless. And in that silence, heavy and unrelenting, everyone waited to see what James would do next. Asterisk. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The officer, once brimming with arrogance, now stood frozen, his authority shattered by the truth he had tried to deny. Around them, the crowd's whispers turned into murmurs of disbelief. They weren't just witnessing an encounter anymore. They were witnessing a lesson unfold in real time. James didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough. With calm dignity, he looked at the officer who had spat at his feet and said nothing. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. The weight of accountability had shifted, and the officer knew it. His uniform could no longer shield him from the truth. Respect cannot be demanded through power. It must be earned through humanity. As the crowd dispersed, phones still recording, one thing became painfully clear. This moment wasn't about titles or rank. It was about the raw reality of how easily a man's worth can be dismissed because of the color of his skin. Even with a lifetime of achievements, James was still reduced, still disrespected, until the truth was revealed. But not every story ends this way. Not every man facing injustice has the chance to show the world who he truly is before harm is done. And that's what makes this story more than just one encounter. It's a mirror held up to society, forcing us to ask, how many more humiliations, how many more injustices before respect is given without condition? Because at its core, this story is not just about James. It's about all of us, what we choose to tolerate and what we choose to change. So I'll leave you with this. If silence can protect injustice, what could our voices do if we used them? Together? If this story touched you, don't just watch. Be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.